Nathan's world had always felt a little off. It wasn't just the little things, like the odd flickers of light or the strange way conversations seemed to loop. It was something deeper, a feeling that had settled in his chest for as long as he could remember. A sensation of being watched, of the world around him not quite being what it seemed. But like everyone else, he had learned to ignore it, chalking it up to fatigue, imagination or stress, until tonight. It was late, the streets of the city unusually quiet, even for this time of night. The sky above was clear, the stars visible between the high-rise buildings that towered over the streets. Nathan walked with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his breath misting in the cold air. Something gnawed at him, an itch in the back of his mind that refused to be scratched. He didn't know why, but tonight felt different. As he passed by a nearby park, his eyes caught something, a flash of light. Too quick to fully register, he stopped, frowning, and looked around. Everything was still. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the faint hum of the city buzzed in the distance. Then he saw her. Standing by the edge of the park, under the soft glow of a street lamp, was a woman unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her long silver hair shimmered under the light, and her skin seemed to almost glow in the darkness. She stood still, looking out over the city with an expression that seemed too calm, too detached. It was as if she didn't belong there, like she was from somewhere else entirely. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. He knew he should keep walking, mind his own business, but something about her drew him in. Without realizing it, his feet carried him closer to her, his curiosity overpowering the caution that usually kept him out of trouble. As he approached, she turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto his. Nathan stopped in his tracks. Her eyes were an intense, piercing blue, unnatural, almost inhuman in their brightness. But they weren't cold. There was something warm, inviting, and deeply knowing in the way she looked at him. "Strange night," Nathan said, trying to sound casual, though his voice came out a little shakier than he intended. The woman studied him for a moment before speaking, her voice soft, melodic. Yes, very strange. There was an accent to her voice, faint, unplaceable. Her words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have, as if they were somehow more significant than the simple pleasantries exchanged by strangers. Nathan took a step closer, his heart pounding in his chest. "You don't seem like you're from around here," he said. Trying to get a read on her, she smiled, a small, almost amused smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I suppose you could say that." Nathan's mind raced. Something about this woman was off. He couldn't explain it, but it was like she didn't fit in with the rest of the world around her, like she was outside of it somehow. "You've noticed it, haven't you?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. Nathan blinked, confused. "Noticed what?" She tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving his. "The glitches. The moments when the world feels wrong." Nathan's stomach churned. How could she know about that? The strange flickers, the repeating moments, the way time seemed to jump sometimes. He had never mentioned it to anyone. He had barely admitted it to himself. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low, suspicion creeping into his tone. The woman stepped closer, and Nathan's pulse quickened. There was something magnetic about her, something that made him want to trust her, even though every instinct in his body screamed at him to run. "My name is Elyra," she said simply, "and like you, I don't belong here." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced around, half expecting the world to shift again, to flicker and blur like it had so many times before. But everything remained still. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elyra looked up at the sky, her expression distant, thoughtful. "This world, it's not real. It's a simulation, a construct designed to keep us trapped. I've been stuck here for longer than I can remember. But now," she paused, her eyes returning to his. "Now, I think I found a way out." Nathan's mind reeled. A simulation? It sounded insane, like something out of a sci-fi movie. But deep down, a part of him had always suspected that something wasn't right. The world never felt complete. There were too many unanswered questions, too many moments that didn't add up. "And what does that have to do with me?" he asked, his voice rough with confusion. Elyra's gaze softened, and she took another step closer, her presence both calming and unnerving at the same time. "Because, Nathan," she said softly, "you're the key." The words hung in the air, and Nathan felt a jolt of electricity shoot down his spine. He didn't know what she meant, but he could feel the weight of her words. The truth behind them, something deep inside him had been waiting for this moment, even if he didn't understand it. As the streetlights flickered and the world around them seemed to hold its breath, Nathan realized that his life was about to change forever, and there was no turning back. Nathan's mind raced as he tried to process what Elyra had just told him, a simulation. It didn't make sense, and yet, deep down, it felt like the answer he'd been waiting for, the explanation for everything that had felt off in his life. He stared at her, unsure of what to say. The key? What does that even mean? Elyra glanced around, her expression wary, as if the very air around them was listening. It means there's something in you, Nathan. Something unique. I've been looking for someone like you for a long time. Nathan took a step back, suddenly feeling trapped. He had been pulled into something far beyond what he could understand. Look, I don't know what you think I am, but I'm just a guy. I'm not special. I don't know anything about simulations or breaking out of them. Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. I know this is a lot to take in, but the fact that you've noticed the glitches, those cracks in the simulation, that means you're different. Most people don't see them. They live their lives, never questioning, never noticing. Nathan shook his head. But why me? What makes me so special? Elyra hesitated, her gaze distant for a moment, as if she were trying to find the right words. You're a connection point, she said finally. Something about you bridges this world and the real one. I don't know why, but I can feel it. Nathan's heart raced. The way she spoke made it sound like he wasn't just part of this simulation. He was the key to breaking out of it. But how could that be? He was just a regular guy, living a regular life. Nothing about him was extraordinary. As if sensing his doubt, Elyra gave him a small, reassuring smile. I don't expect you to understand everything right now, but you've already started to see through the cracks, and that's more than most people ever do. Nathan wanted to argue, to push back, but the flickers of doubt he'd been carrying for so long were too strong. The glitches, the moments that didn't make sense, they weren't just coincidences. They were signs. He had always felt like he didn't quite belong, like the world around him was just slightly off. And now, standing here with Elyra, he felt like he was finally getting answers. What do I have to do? He asked, his voice quiet but determined. Elyra's expression grew serious. We need to find the source of the simulation, the place where everything is controlled. If we can reach that point, we can shut it down. But it won't be easy. The system will fight back. Nathan frowned. The system? Elyra nodded. This simulation is designed to protect itself. It adapts, changes, to keep us trapped. The more we push against it, the harder it will fight to keep us inside. Nathan's stomach churned at the thought. He had always thought of the world as a place of rules, laws, order, but now it sounded more like a prison, one designed to keep him from ever knowing the truth. How do we fight it? He asked. Elyra's eyes sparkled with a mix of determination and something else, hope. Maybe we disrupt it. You've already started to do that, just by noticing the glitches. The more we push, the more the simulation will reveal itself. Nathan swallowed hard. The idea of actively disrupting reality sounded insane, and yet he couldn't deny the strange thrill of it. For so long, he had felt like something was missing from his life. Now he knew what it was, the truth. Elyra turned and began walking toward the edge of the park, motioning for him to follow. Come on, I'll show you. Reluctantly, Nathan followed, his mind still spinning with everything she had told him. As they walked, the streetlights above flickered, casting strange shadows on the ground. Every now and then, Nathan thought he saw something out of the corner of his eye, shapes moving in the distance, the world shifting for a split second before snapping back into place. They reached a quiet alleyway, and Elyra stopped in front of a rusted metal door. She placed her hand on it, and for a moment, the door seemed to shimmer, its surface rippling like water. Nathan's heart raced. What is this place? Elyra glanced back at him. It's a node, a point where the simulation's layers overlap. There are places like this all over the city, hidden in plain sight. The system uses them to reset itself, to fix glitches before they spread. She pushed the door open, revealing a dark staircase leading downward. But if we're careful, we can use them to our advantage. Nathan hesitated at the top of the stairs, staring into the darkness below. Every instinct told him to turn back, to walk away and forget about all of this. But something inside him pushed him forward, a force he couldn't explain. Elyra descended the stairs, and after a moment of hesitation, Nathan followed. The air grew colder as they moved deeper underground, the walls around them humming faintly with energy. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with a mix of fear and curiosity. The further they went, the more he began to notice subtle changes in the air, glitches, like faint ripples in reality, as if the world was trying to hide something from him. At the bottom of the stairs, Elyra stopped in front of a heavy steel door. She placed her hand on it, and once again, the door shimmered and rippled before slowly creaking open. Nathan stepped through the doorway and froze. Before him was a vast chamber, filled with strange machinery that hummed and pulsed with energy. The walls were lined with screens, each displaying different parts of the city above, streets, buildings, people going about their lives, unaware of the hidden world below. "This is one of the control centers," Elyra said quietly. "It's where the system monitors everything, where it watches us." Nathan stared in awe, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The world above felt so real, so tangible, and yet here it was, laid out before him like data on a screen. Elyra walked over to one of the machines and placed her hand on it, causing the screens to flicker. "This is just the beginning. If we can find the central hub, we can shut the simulation down for good." Nathan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time, he felt like he was truly seeing the world for what it was, a construct, a prison designed to keep him from the truth. And now, with Elyra by his side, he was ready to tear it down. Nathan stood in the vast chamber, his eyes darting across the screens lining the walls. The surreal nature of what he was seeing began to settle in. People walking the streets, driving cars, living their lives, unaware that they were being monitored like data points in a massive, complex program. It made him feel small and insignificant, yet at the same time, vital. Elyra's words echoed in his mind. "You're the key." "How did you find this place?" Nathan asked, his voice low as if speaking too loudly would alert the system. Elyra tapped on one of the machines, her eyes scanning the data flashing across the screens. "It took years of trial and error. I've been searching for weak points in the simulation, places where the system's control falters. There aren't many, but once I started noticing them, I learned to follow the signals. The closer I got, the more the simulation tried to stop me." Nathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Stop you? What do you mean?" Elyra glanced at him, her expression serious. "The system adapts. It fights back. The more you push, the more it pushes back. It can manipulate reality to keep us trapped, to distract us, or even worse." Nathan's heart raced. "Worse?" Elyra sighed, her eyes darkening. "People disappear. Nathan, if you get too close to the truth, the system finds a way to erase you." The gravity of her words settled heavily on his chest. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. "So what happens if we keep going?" Elyra looked away, her voice quiet. "We risk being erased. But I can't stop now, and neither can you. We're too close." Nathan stared at the machinery humming around him, his pulse quickening. Every instinct told him to run, to leave this all behind, but he couldn't. He needed answers. He had come this far. He couldn't turn back now. Elyra stepped away from the machine and approached him, her eyes searching his. "You're scared. I understand. But you're stronger than you realize. The system has been trying to keep you blind for your entire life, and yet here you are, standing in the middle of its control center." Nathan nodded, his throat tight. "But why me? Why am I the key?" Elyra hesitated for a moment before answering. "You're special. Nathan, you have a unique connection to this place, to the simulation. I don't know why yet, but you're different from the others. You've seen the cracks. You've felt it." Nathan tried to process what she was saying. His entire life, he had felt out of place, like there was something wrong with the world, something just beneath the surface that he couldn't reach. And now, he was being told that he had been right all along. "Look," Elyra said, pointing at one of the screens. "That's you!" Nathan stepped closer, his eyes widening as he saw his own image on the screen. He was walking through the city, just a few hours earlier, the camera tracking his every move. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the world was watching his every step. "It's been watching you for a long time," Elyra said softly, "but you've been watching it too. That's why you're so important. The simulation can't control you the way it controls others." Nathan's stomach churned. "So what do we do now? How do we shut this thing down?" Elyra turned to face him, her eyes glowing with determination. "We disrupt it from within. We need to get closer to the core of the simulation. If we can reach the central hub, We can sever its connection to the rest of the system. But it's dangerous. Nathan, the system will do everything it can to stop us. Nathan clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the task before him. He had spent his entire life questioning the world around him, never knowing why he felt so different. But now, he had a purpose. He wasn't just a cog in the machine, he was the key to breaking it. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. Elyra smiled, a small, sad smile. "Good. But we have to move quickly. The system knows we're here." Suddenly, the lights in the chamber flickered, and a low rumbling sound echoed through the room. Nathan's heart pounded as the machinery around them began to hum louder, the screens flashing with rapid data. "It's reacting," Elyra said. "It's trying to shut us out." Without warning, the floor beneath them shook violently, and a crack split the ground, sending sparks flying into the air. Nathan stumbled but managed to catch himself against one of the machines. "We have to go, now!" Elyra shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the door. They raced up the stairs, the walls around them trembling as if the simulation itself was trying to collapse in on them. Nathan's mind whirled, adrenaline pumping through his veins as the reality of the situation set in. The system was alive, and it was fighting back. As they reached the surface, the night sky flickered, and for a brief moment, Nathan saw the grid, lines of data and code crisscrossing the sky like a massive web. It was as if the simulation was beginning to unravel, its facade breaking down. Elyra pointed toward the horizon. "There, we need to get to the main hub. It's not far, but the system will send everything it has to stop us." Nathan nodded, his pulse racing. "Let's do this." They sprinted through the city, the world glitching and flickering around them. Nathan felt the simulation struggling to hold itself together, cracks widening with each step. People remained oblivious to the chaos beneath the surface. As they neared the city's edge, a glowing structure loomed. Elyra whispered, "That's it, the central hub." "We're almost there," Nathan muttered. "We're not alone." Elyra nodded, too close to stop now. They pressed on, the ground shaking beneath their feet as they approached the hub. The lights in the city flickered wildly, the world distorting and twisting around them as the simulation struggled to maintain control. And then, just as they reached the base of the hub, the air around them shimmered, and from the darkness, figures emerged and tall, faceless beings made of pure energy, their forms flickering like static. "The system's sentinels," Elyra whispered, her voice tense. "They're here to stop us." Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as the sentinels advanced, their forms crackling with energy, their movements deliberate. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the realization that everything depended on what they did next. "Stay close," Elyra said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We're almost there." With a deep breath, Nathan nodded, and together they charged toward the hub, ready to face whatever the simulation had in store for them. The sentinels moved toward Nathan and Elyra with terrifying precision, their bodies crackling with raw energy. Nathan's pulse raced as they closed the distance, each step causing the ground to tremble beneath them. The air buzzed with an intensity that made his skin prickle. He glanced at Elyra, her face set with determination, her eyes glowing faintly as the simulation reacted to her presence. "There's no going back now," Elyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We either break the system or it breaks us." Nathan tightened his grip on the makeshift metal rod he had picked up from the debris, though he had no idea how they were supposed to fight beings made of energy. "How do we stop them?" he asked, his voice shaking.
Elyra turned to him,
her expression softening. "The sentinels aren't real, Nathan. They're projections, constructs of the simulation. They can't hurt us unless we let them." Before Nathan could respond, one of the sentinels lunged toward him, its arm reaching out like a tendril of electricity. Instinctively, Nathan swung the rod, but it passed through the sentinel as though it were made of smoke. He stumbled back, fear gripping him. "I can't fight this," he shouted, panic rising in his chest. Elyra grabbed his arm, pulling him close. "You don't need to fight them," she said firmly. "We need to focus on the hub." Nathan's eyes darted toward the glowing structure ahead of them, the heart of the simulation. The sentinels were just distractions, meant to keep them from reaching their goal. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Go," Elyra shouted, pushing him toward the hub. "I'll keep them distracted." "What?"
"No!"
Nathan protested, but Elyra had already stepped forward, raising her arms as energy began to pulse around her. She was glowing now, her body surrounded by a faint aura of light. The sentinels hesitated for a brief moment, as if sensing her power. "Go." "Nathan," Elyra yelled, her voice laced with urgency. "I'll meet you at the core." Nathan hesitated for only a second before sprinting toward the hub, his heart pounded in his ears, each step feeling heavier as the ground around him trembled. The sentinels swarmed around Elyra, drawn to her energy, their forms flickering as they tried to close in on her. He reached the base of the hub, its surface smooth and metallic, pulsing with energy. The hum of the structure was deafening, and Nathan could feel the immense power radiating from it. His mind raced. How was he supposed to shut down something so massive, so incomprehensible? His hands fumbled against the glowing surface, searching for anything, an entry point, a panel. But the structure felt impenetrable, like an unbreakable barrier between him and the truth. "I don't know what to do," he shouted, frustration boiling over. But then, he remembered Elyra's words, "You're the key." Nathan closed his eyes, focusing on the energy around him, trying to sense what Elyra had felt. The simulation wasn't just a machine, it was alive, and he was connected to it in ways he didn't fully understand. He could feel it now, pulsing beneath his fingertips, like a living entity waiting to be disrupted. He placed both hands on the hub's surface and let his mind open. The world around him began to shift, the ground beneath his feet vibrating as the simulation reacted to his presence. Pushing against him, trying to keep him from the truth. But Nathan didn't back down. He pushed harder, letting the energy flow through him. His mind filled with images, glitches, flickers of the world beyond the simulation, the real world that lay hidden beneath the layers of code and control. And then he felt it. A crack, a weak point in the system. His eyes snapped open, and with a surge of determination, he pressed against the hub, willing the simulation to break. The ground beneath him shook violently, and the hub's glowing surface flickered, the energy pulsing erratically. The sentinels let out a screeching sound, their forms distorting as they struggled to maintain cohesion. Elyra, still glowing with her own energy, looked toward Nathan, her eyes wide with hope. "You're doing it!" She shouted, her voice barely audible over the deafening hum of the hub. Nathan gritted his teeth, pushing harder, feeling the simulation unraveling around him. The grid-like patterns in the sky began to collapse, the world flickering in and out of existence as the system fought to hold itself together. But it was losing. The sentinels began to disintegrate, their forms dissolving into static as the simulation's control faltered. Elyra ran toward Nathan, her glowing form a beacon in the chaos. "Nathan, you're almost there," she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. Nathan felt the last bit of resistance crumble beneath his hands, and with a final push, the hub's surface cracked, a burst of light erupting from within. The entire structure trembled, its power failing as the simulation began to collapse in on itself. The world around them shattered. For a moment, everything was silent. The city, the streets, the sentinels, all of it was gone. Nathan stood in a vast, empty void, the only sound his own heartbeat thudding in his ears. Elyra stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Nathan looked around, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The simulation was gone, the illusion shattered. But what was left? What was real? "Is this it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elyra smiled softly. "Not yet. This is just the beginning." Before Nathan could respond, the darkness around them began to shift, slowly. The void was replaced by light, natural, warm light. The ground beneath his feet solidified, and in the distance, he could see rolling hills, forests, and a bright blue sky. "This?" Nathan's voice trailed off as he took in the scene. "Is this the real world?" Elyra nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Yes, we've made it out." Nathan turned to face her, his heart still pounding in his chest. "What happens now?" Elyra's expression softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "Now we figure out what comes next. Together." Nathan squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch. For the first time in his life, the world felt real, solid, tangible. But with that reality came new questions, new uncertainties. "Are there others?" he asked, his voice tentative. Elyra's gaze drifted to the horizon. "I don't know, but we'll find out. The system may be gone, but there's a whole world out there waiting for us." Nathan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their journey settle on his shoulders. They had broken free from the simulation, but their adventure was far from over. Together, They stepped forward, ready to face whatever lay beyond the horizon.